back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and we're very glad that you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We have the pleasure of having Stan Bynam, who is a chemist. He's worked for National Enzyme Company for over 8 years and is now the senior director of research and development at Infinity, a company that is involved in developing nutritional products that focus on the use of enzymes and probiotics. Really fabulous, fabulous company that is doing everything they can to bring greater nutritional awareness to the world and to create a place where people can be healthy and take care of themselves without having to rely on doctors and standard medical practices for a person's own well-being. So Stan, it's been a pleasure to have you on now.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Good to be here.
Thanks
Good to
for
be
coming.
here.
Good.
That was an excellent introduction, by the way. It actually was listening to you do that introduction, and it sort of brought back a few flashbacks of exactly how I came to work with both National Enzyme Company and then eventually the company I now work with, which is Infinity.
Mm-hmm. How's
Infinity.
that? I have to ask now.
If you don't mind, and it's
Please,
not a burden,
please do.
I would share that.
Yeah.
Which
I feel that our motivations to do things are vitally important in what it is we're doing.
Okay, I've actually been involved in the nutritional supplement business in one respect or another in various capacities for about 25 years. And mostly as a chemist and formulator.
Mm-hmm.
And all that time, almost from the inception of my first interest in that field, I'd heard the name of a particular authority and one of the pioneers in the health movement, natural health movement,
Mm-hmm.
as we call it. And that man is Dr. Edward Howell. I should say was. He's deceased. He died in 1988. And he was the founder of the National Enzyme Company. And
He's the gentleman, the doctor, who brought forth the importance, the emphasis on enzymes for human health.
Indeed. He first exposed the world to the importance of enzymes, and in fact he innovated the concept that we know as enzyme nutrition. Eventually he wrote that book that is still, you still find it in health food stores and some other bookstores as well.
Sure.
And it's an excellent basic book on the subject of enzyme nutrition. And he laid out the principles, the foundation of the importance of these little things we call enzymes, and that really are the decisive factor for an awful lot of people as to whether or not they're able to get nutritional benefit from the food that they eat,
Right.
no matter how good that food is.
Yeah.
He pointed out to us that one of the things that we do to food that reduces its nutritional value and sometimes takes it away entirely is the simple act of cooking it and destroying those enzymes. Every time you cook a food, it takes away the enzyme content of that food.
That's right. It literally destroys it.
It does.
Over, what is it, 108 degrees?
Roughly 118.
18.
That was the...
You'd be safe at 108.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Dr. Howell, in all of his research, finally arrived at the number 118 Fahrenheit as a number that would be sort of the breakover point.
After which,
essentially all of the enzyme content of any food would be destroyed. And so in connection with my work with that company, the National Enzyme Company, I was their technical director, and it was my job to work with a lot of companies who actually presented products to the marketplace,
enzyme-based products.
Enzyme-based products, and products which employed the principles of enzyme nutrition in their formulation technique and so on like that. And I was the formulation guy who was in charge of taking the principles that Dr. Howell had laid down and applying those to about the, excuse me, I'd say the products that were enzyme connected of about 200 different companies during the time that I was there. It was a very rewarding experience. but I have to say that eventually I did make, as I've already mentioned, a career change and moved my family from Missouri to Arizona to join the mission, and I literally mean it that way, the mission of this other company called Infinity. And the reasons that I did that are really, I guess, very personal, and that is that I saw that there was the opportunity not only to continue to employ many of the principles of nutrition and the great benefits that I had seen in my years with National Enzyme from the delivery of the principles of enzyme nutrition, but also for maybe the first time I was able to see that area of nutrition actually converged into a whole health mission, not just nutrition, I might add. And that meant a lot to me too. You know, there are a lot of things that have to do with health that are not just to do with the makeup of our food. Things like envisionment, you know, having a proper vision of life.
That's right. Attitude.
And exactly. And
there's a physiological basis to attitude.
There certainly is.
There's a neurophysiology to that.
You know, I'd like to address that point a little bit later after I talk about another subject, which I'd like to get onto.
Yes.
But the thing that attracted me so much to make a transition in my employment and in my location of living of several thousand miles was the fact that I am now able to work in an environment that brings together a whole life message and a mission.
Right.
And it's very
including but not limited to nutrition.
Exactly.
100%. It's interesting because you were in a position at National Enzyme Company to meet with an array, a vast array of different nutritionally oriented companies and know the companies themselves, the presidents, their missions, whatever they may be, varied as they may be. And so it's quite a statement, Stan, that you would have selected one out of them all to decide to go and uproot yourself and your family and go and move and become part of their company, leaving National Enzyme Company.
Well, I realize that what you say is true. It is a significant statement.
It's not a small statement.
Yes, it is. And I don't say by no means, but what I say, it does not mean to take anything away from many of the companies who make fine products and you know, have good programs and so on like that. But it does make a difference if there is a whole health mission that encompasses what I consider to be all phases of health.
Absolutely.
And that really does make a difference. It's made a difference for me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So.
Yeah.
Welcome to Infinity.
That's right.
I felt the same way about it years ago, and I got involved in it as well.
Yeah.
And I was attracted very much to the mission statement. And I felt that these were guys with a lot of integrity, a lot of honor, and they really meant what they were saying. Doug Grant and his colleagues. So I'm glad to be connected to it as well.
Good.
Yeah. So what is your research bringing up these days, now that you're there full time?
We're doing a lot of interesting things. We're learning a lot about new methods of using enzyme delivery for nutrients, and I'm continuing, mainly you might say I'm doing the same job that I always did, which is expanding the role of enzymes. And so we're doing, you know, a lot of that and working with new products, doing research projects. But there is one particular thing that I would like to talk about, and you and I have discussed this a little bit, and that is an issue concerning the immune system of the human race. And this came up for me, I'll say about a year ago.
A small subject, obviously. Just for the human race.
Hey, let's not limit it to that, by the way, because we're not just talking about the human race. We're actually talking about all life forms.
That's right.
This
is an ecological issue.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is, and it's a life universal issue.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm talking about is that we were doing, and we constantly do, research particularly related to the digestive system. We realize that the main role that enzymes have is in increasing the efficiency and the health of the digestive system as a starting point for where nutrition has to begin. In other words, if you can't digest something, it doesn't matter how good a food it is. You're not going to be able to get the benefit from it.
It's valueless, actually.
Exactly. It is. And so we constantly review the research that's available, and we constantly find new subjects, new specific areas to study within the health of the digestive system. And I'd say that I probably have spent easily a third of the research attention that I've given since I've been with Infinity to studying digestive health. And some trends began to appear in some of the studies that were reviewing and sort of putting together, and a picture began to emerge, you might say, that really brought something home to me that came to be a matter of real concern, and that has to do with the immune defenses that people have, and what they should be in terms of a certain threat that exists today, perhaps in our world today, as it may never have in recorded history. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. We're aware that there's great concern, and rightly so, about emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. And we're talking about things like AIDS and like exotic viruses like the hantavirus and like Ebola and so on like that. You might say the marquee diseases, if I could put it that way. And those have attracted a lot of attention. But what has been less noticed is the re-emerging diseases, that is, the old diseases that at one time were the scourge of mankind and actually were the determinant factor of health. Things like yellow fever and like tuberculosis and like malaria, absolutely. And in other words, a common, if you want to put it that way, common historical diseases that at one time we thought we had them on the run and under control. And when I say we, I'm talking about the general health-oriented community.
Right.
A famous statement was made by the Surgeon General of the United States in 1969. He made the statement, "It's time to close the book on infectious disease." He was addressing a medical convention at that time. And he was simply reflecting.
If only it were true.
Exactly. He was reflecting the prevailing medical thought at the time, which was a sort of, and I don't mean this disparaging toward any particular doctor, but a sort of an arrogance. I
was going to say the prevailing medical presumption or arrogance.
Whatever. Anyway, what he was expressing was what was thought for the most part at that time in mainstream medicine,
right?
and which was that with all of the methods of sanitation and all of the scientific quarantine methods we had figured out how to do.
And vaccines,
and especially the miracle drugs, the antibiotics. Ever since in 1928, Alexander Fleming developed penicillin. It's been just a wonderful thing that's happened to the human race, that now we can kill bugs with chemicals without killing the patient. And that's, of course, always been the dream of doctors. And frankly, the writers that I've read on this subject say that had a psychological effect on medicine. It gave doctors a terrific sense of power, and which persists to this day, undoubtedly.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so,
It actually unnaturally, as you would imagine, inflated their sense of value and importance in treating any number of different diseases, which they really weren't qualified for. And if asked, they would tell you, behind closed doors, the truth. But penicillin isn't the panacea. In fact, I'm hoping that you could enlighten us, Dan, and let us know what the real scoop, the real truth of the effects, the long-term effects, which we now have access to observing, is of penicillin.
Actually, Dr. Alexander Fleming, that brilliant scientist who developed penicillin, and he was brilliant, by the way. Some people who paint the picture of how he discovered penicillin say that he did it by accident and it was only serendipity and he wasn't really all that smart. But he actually was. I've read quite a bit of Dr. Fleming's work, and he was a brilliant scientist and physician.
I think you have to be smart to make such a mistake or accident. So.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what really proves to me that he was smart. He made his discovery in 1928 and announced it to the Royal Society in London. 2 years later, in 1930, he also delivered a paper which was less noticed to the Royal Society, in which he announced his further experiments on penicillin and the phenomenon that we know as antibiotics. And in that, he predicted that there would be something called antibiotic resistance that would develop. He said that he had already observed it in his laboratory. He said the same penicillin, when he used it against bacteria, would kill off the weak bacteria, but it wouldn't kill the strong ones. And so the strong ones would then multiply, and they would be resistant to the penicillin. And he said, in a very prophetic fashion, he said that every antibiotic developed by man will eventually develop an antibiotic strain of the bacteria that it acts against. And you know what? That's exactly what's come true. And it's become a humbling experience for some of the practitioners of medicine, especially at the highest levels. I'm talking about the heads of the teaching hospitals and the authorities like the department heads of the Centers for Disease Control, who realize what, in a way, a monster we have created. Undoubtedly, the antibiotics are miracle drugs in certain situations, in certain, I should say, limited situations, where
isolated situations.
Exactly, where there is a life-threatening infection, and it's an emergency, and the life can be saved by the administration of an antibiotic to keep the infection from quickly killing the victim.
Yeah.
But what has happened instead in the administration of antibiotics is that they've been used just for anything. They've been used as a panacea to cure anything. And it's a notorious fact that most of the prescriptions that are given for antibiotics are not even for infections. And there's not even an infection involved. And in many of the cases where there is an infection involved, it's not a bacterial infection. And so, of course, antibiotics do no good. And it's a well-known fact that antibiotics, in fact, suppress natural immunity. And so that's one of the factors that I began to notice in the study. I read a really significant
That's pretty powerful.
book. It is.
Itself right there.
I read a book written by a world-renowned authority on antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. He is a professor of medicine at Tufts University, which is a really highly thought of, prestigious medical school in the Boston area. And he titled his book, The Antibiotic Paradox, How Miracle Drugs Are Destroying the Miracle. And in it he outlined...
What is his name, the author?
That's Stuart Levy, Dr. Stuart Levy. And in that book, he laid the whole thing out. He says the whole scenario from the days of Fleming to present day, when hospitals are experiencing what are called nosocomial infections, nosocomial disease. that's a word that's creeping into the common English vocabulary, and what it means is a disease that you get in a hospital. You didn't have the disease when you got there, but
Well, I thought iatrogenic.
iatrogenic,
So,
of
well,
course,
that's
means it's
doctor
caused by the treatment.
based. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it means the treatment causes the disease.
Oh, this is hospital.
Yeah, this is
Based.
specifically hospital-based. Nosocomial means hospital. You got it in the
I
hospital.
see.
Right.
They had to go back to the Latin or Greek to get that one.
Right.
Right. Thank you very much, AMA.
No kidding. Well, you know, that is becoming...
So no one will really understand what it means unless you happen
yeah,
to know.
we
Sounds
don't
like
want
a
to
disease.
come right out and say that our hospitals are causing disease, but unfortunately that is the fact. That is, you know, especially certain kinds of bacteria, such as the ones that cause pneumonia, and the famous Staphylococcus aureus infection, which is killing so many infants in hospitals now. And larger and larger percentages of those bacteria causing those infections are becoming antibiotic resistant. I read some interesting figures from the Centers for Disease Control recently, and they've done a study showing that not only the rate of antibiotic resistance is increasing with respect to the Staph aureus infections, and at alarming rates. It's becoming, in some hospitals, as high as 50% of those infections are not treatable. They can't be treated with any antibiotics. And the irony is that the problem is the worst in the largest hospitals. The hospitals with the most equipment and the most facilities, and you would think the most capability.
Right, the best equipped.
Absolutely. The the centers of our medical technology is where this problem is really the worst.
How can you explain that?
It's difficult to explain except
Do
this
they
way.
attach themselves to the machines or something?
No, not necessarily. You know what it has to do with? It has to do with the rate of the use of antibiotics.
Oh.
Coincidentally, and it's not actually a coincidence at all, the rate of use of antibiotics in hospitals has been increasing at a very alarming rate, to the point that it's projected, I read, let's see, the first report on this I read was that in 1965, the first year that we can find any figures on hospital purchases in the U.S. of antibiotics, they purchased $78 million worth of antibiotics. Now that sounds like a lot. However, in 1991, the hospitals in the U.S. purchased $3 billion worth of antibiotics. And the projected figure for this year, 1997, is $8 billion in purchases of antibiotics. And so hospitals with bigger budgets are buying more antibiotics.
It sounds like the military budget of the United States government.
Hey, it's the size of the gross domestic product of some countries.
That's right.
But, you know, and we can joke about these things, but actually it is an incredibly serious matter. And,
oh yeah.
And
well, there's that, you know, that motto in medicine. Have you heard it? When in doubt, prescribe an antibiotic.
I hadn't heard that motto, but I see it in practice all the time.
Right. Well, I actually observed the dispensing of it, you know, and then came up with that. Of course, I mean, it's got. No, I have known of many instances when doctors really don't know what to do. They misdiagnose or cannot diagnose a problem, but someone continues to complain of certain kinds of symptoms, so they more or less give a broad-based antibiotic, because that's what they have in their armamentarium. They don't have touch, they don't have massage, they don't have nutrition, they don't have other means at their disposal, the general practitioner, to offer something that would be healing and therapeutic without the side effects, which I think is going to also be a major change in the way medicine is practiced. That to heal somebody doesn't mean they have to also be going into kidney failure or liver toxicity, because that's what the drug or the medicine, so to speak, used quite loosely, creates. There has to be a way of administering medicine that is healthy all the way around.
I'll tell you, I think that what you say is not only eminently true, but it's being eminently realized by some of the top authorities. I mentioned the Centers for Disease Control, which is really the cutting edge of the government, the public funded
research
arm of medicine.
Sure.
And of course they're active not only in the U.S. as a U.S. agency, but all over the world. They're probably the preeminent epidemiological agency in the entire world. They've sort of supplanted the World Health Organization in that role. And they do some very heroic things. And in '95, U.S. News and World Report did sort of a special edition on the CDC, and it was very good. What they did, they went in and interviewed one-on-one a lot of the department heads within the CDC, and they dug up some very good information, and they revealed some very unheralded attitudes. One of the ones that struck me the most, they spoke to the Dr. Mitchell Cohen, who is the head of the infectious diseases branch of the CDC, one of the major branches of the CDC. And Dr. Cohen made a very provocative statement, or I considered it to be, and he was discussing this issue of antibiotic resistance and the fact that there were so many diseases now that were cropping up and epidemics that were flaring up that did not respond to antibiotics. And what he said was, we're going back to a pre-antibiotic era. Now, that was profound, and it was also significant of something that it told me that Dr. Cohen realized something that a lot of doctors have not yet realized, but I think the realization is growing, and it is that the resource that we have to resist these plagues, if you will, the diseases that apparently we really don't have an answer for, that are increasing in severity and frequency in our culture. The real resource that we have is called natural immunity. And that's what we had in the pre-antibiotic era. Dr. Mitchell Cohen said we're going back to the pre-antibiotic era, and people, I don't know how many people are old enough to remember some of the old black and white movies when the doctor was painted as a caring, touching, kindly hero, which he was usually.
Sure.
Maybe the old country doctor came out to the farmhouse, and the little girl was she was in a terrible state. She had an infection, perhaps she was in a coma, or she was delirious, and she was in a bed, and so he would tend to her. The
doctor would nurse her back.
He would, exactly. That's right.
Ironically.
He made house calls.
Yeah.
And he would pray with her, and he would sit by her bedside, and he'd comfort the family, and then he'd speak to them about that there was a healing crisis coming. Well, what he was describing really was he was describing the battle between the infection and the natural immune system of the body. And what's so significant about this to me is that it really does point the way for us. Dr. Cohen pointed the way. He said, you folks out there, I don't know if he was intending it this way, but this way I read it. You folks out there better get busy and pay attention to your natural immunity. You better get your immune defenses in order. We've ignored that for so long because we've been so distracted by all this high-tech medicine that we've had, and this belief that we could take care of any infection if it came along, and our arrogant attitude that we had conquered all the infectious diseases, and that we were going to be able to now go into an era where they were going to have these disease-causing bacteria.
Infectious disease. But let me just clarify something here. You said "our" in kind of a royal way, and I want to make a distinction here. We're not the ones who came up with the idea of conquering infectious diseases. It's the AMA and all of its people, its members, that have made that profound and presumptuous statement. It's not been us that have been interested in denying the importance of developing natural immunity. It's been specifically the medical community of this country and the entire Western world that has run a propaganda machine to keep us from doing things naturally, simply, and wholly for our own benefit.
Well,
I mean, the point really does need to be made. I mean, there is a culprit in this scenario.
I totally agree with you. I don't, you know, when I say our, I'm talking
You were being
about,
very diplomatic
that's
and
right.
kind.
I'm talking
and I appreciate that.
in sort of a societal sense.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you that for about 30 years now, I've been a rebel against that kind of thinking and
Sure.
and that kind
Well,
of.
the profession you chose, Stan, shows that. You've been slowly mitigating the effects of the propagandist machine. And I'm using that word because I really believe that's what it is, because underneath that is an entire economic industrial complex known as the
Oh, boy.
pharmaceutical industry.
You know,
let's be honest about
I've
it.
even heard of that very complex referred to in some very interesting circles as the medical industrial complex.
Oh, I
And-
didn't just make it up?
Oh, you didn't just make that up. Although it's
I thought I did.
it was very appropriate. But believe me, it has been noted that
Yeah.
there exists such a thing. And you know, I'd like to get back to that
Sure.
in just a second. But with all these considerations, this began to be of great concern to me.
Yes.
And one other issue came into focus, and you know, kind of philosophically considering what immunity consists of, you know, kind of taking the clue from what Dr. Cohen says, where folks are going to have to start thinking about our natural immunity. What does natural immunity consist of? Well, you know, our whole body is an immune system. Our whole body
Yes.
is intended to be a shield against the harsh outside world. It's supposed to protect the cells of our body and keep them in a happy environment, in homeostasis,
Right.
in a friendly fluid, and protect them from things like infective organisms.
Mhm.
And even our skin is very capable of doing that. Our skin, a good healthy skin, will ward off most infections. It's
Mhm.
constantly bombarded. I mean, we're immersed in a sea of bacteria and viruses,
That's right.
parasites, and various kinds
And all
of...
sorts of people.
That's right. And so...
No, it's true. I mean, our skin is just like a building has a skin
Mhm.
to protect it from the outside world. We have a skin that
Yep,
does the
absolutely.
same thing.
And that's our first, if you want to put it this way, that's our
Yeah,
the
first
first element of
level
our
of
immune
defense.
system. That's our first line of defense. And then, you know, even when we breathe in, and we're constant, you know, there are potentially infective, like mold spores, things like that in the air. We breathe those in. Well, our lungs have powerful immune defenses in the mucous membranes inside the lungs.
Even before that, our nose.
Absolutely.
The hair on our nose.
Yep. And so we're a whole immune mechanism.
Yeah.
We really are.
That's a really nice way of looking at it and describing the human body.
And probably the most vulnerable part we have, the most vulnerable route of infection is our digestive tract. We don't have good defenses inherently in our digestive tract because our digestive tract is designed to take things in, not keep them out. You know, absorb things, not ward them off.
Yes.
So we're equipped with two very important shields within our digestive system. Now the first one actually happens in our stomach. Whenever you eat something or swallow something, actually you don't have to eat it, you know, an infective organism can come in just in your saliva. It can come, you know, in through the air, you can get it in your mouth and then you can swallow it. And it could potentially cause a threatening infection. However, the stomach is equipped with a powerful acid, which is capable of totally disinfecting the contents of the stomach. Hydrochloric acid. And it also participates in a very powerful way in the digestive process. But very importantly, it is a natural shield against any infective organism. It's capable of very quickly killing bacteria, viruses, mold or fungus, or even parasites. Parasites, the bodies or eggs of parasites will be quickly denatured and killed by the powerful acid bath of the stomach. So that's a very important defense. Now, let me tell you the bad news about that. And that is that it's a funny thing. Ever since the 40s, roughly, we have somehow been convinced that acid is bad. We've gotten the idea that that acid causes our digestive upsets.
Like heartburn.
Exactly, like heartburn or like indigestion, quote unquote, or as they very nicely put it in the United Kingdom, they call it dyspepsia. That's actually the better medical term. But, and of course ulcers, and at one time, in fact, it was thought that stomach acid causes ulcers. Since then, by the way, very careful research has shown that stomach acid has nothing to do with ulcers, except that it does cause, the acid it gets on the ulcer and causes it to burn. It gives you a signal that you have one, but it didn't cause it in the first place. There's a confusion there.
Well, as long as you've gone this far, would you tell us what does cause ulcers?
Interestingly enough, the National Institutes of Health held a conference a couple of years ago and issued a position paper on that very subject. And what they found is that ulcers are caused by a bacteria called H. pylori. And there's a whole story behind that. But in spite of that, most ulcers, interestingly enough, if you went into a medical office and you had an ulcer, what they would most likely treat it with is an antacid. They would give you an antacid, and you know what? Your acid would go away. Also, your shield against bacteria would go away. And your
that
symptoms
particular
would go
bacteria
away.
will proliferate.
It would flourish because it loves that. What we found is all kinds of interesting papers in the medical literature. The standard way of treating ulcers and heartburn and things like that for many years was to give a simple alkalizing thing of some kind, like Tums or baking soda or something like that, and sort of neutralize some of that stomach acid. And then you'd shut off the symptoms. It was kind of like I've heard this analogy given when you're going along the highway and the oil warning light comes on your car indicating that you're low on oil.
Yes.
Then if you just kind of put a piece of Scotch tape over the oil light or something over the oil light.
Symptom relief.
That's right. That's called treating the symptoms instead of the cause.
That's good.
And so that really is what's been going on. And that's it. Science has shown even that. Good scientific studies show that there is no improvement in any of those conditions. They just keep coming back, and you just keep pouring cutting or covering up the oil light, whatever. But what we found was, about in 1977, the pharmaceutical industry saw an opportunity here. They said, well, instead of neutralizing that stomach acid once it gets in the stomach, let's shut off the ability of the body to even make stomach acid. We can do this through the miracle of biochemistry. And by the way, they're very competent biochemists. Through the miracle of biochemistry, we can shut off the body's even ability to make hydrochloric acid. And so they invented this whole new class of drugs. They're called acid blockers. And I'll tell you their names because they've become famous. I'm talking about Tagamet, Zantac, Pepsid, and Axid, the big four. About 2 years after those drugs were first brought on the market, the first research papers began to appear showing that you might say a scientist's worst fears were being realized. Let me tell you what I mean. You would think that if you shut off the acid that efficiently to the stomach, that it would allow bacteria to flourish, since one of the main purposes of that stomach acid is to kill bacteria.
Sure.
You know what? It's true. That's exactly what happens. And good scientific studies, beginning in England and then also being verified in U.S. medical research, showed that indeed what was happening was that the stomach was being turned into a fermenting tank for bacteria. I mean, serious pathogenic bacteria. And we have run across so far in our search of the literature 2 studies showing that there have been significant deaths in hospitals by the hospital administration of those antacid drugs. I'm going to have to share with you a hidden agenda I have here, and that is that I'm after those drugs. I am out to expose those. I think that the continued marketing of those drugs is highly irresponsible, and if there is any way to do it, I intend to see that they're taken off the market. I think, in 1995, those 4 drugs, the 4 that I mentioned, and I'll repeat their names.
Okay.
Tagamet,
for everyone to know.
Zantac, Pepsid, and Axid. Those 4 drugs, the patents ran out. They were all invented, and patented in 1977, so their patents ran out in 1995. And so the pharmaceutical companies that produce those drugs approached the FDA. Actually, they did it, several years in advance. They were planning in advance. Be aware that Tagamet, when it was introduced as a pharmaceutical, was the most successful pharmaceutical in the history of that industry. It was the first billion-dollar drug. It was the first drug ever to sell $1 billion worth in prescription form. And so what they wanted to do, they said, well, okay, we're going to now we'd like to put these drugs on the over-the-counter market, so that anybody can use them. And we'll advertise them heavily instead of selling through the prescription route through the doctors. We'll advertise them heavily, and people will just buy them because we'll tell them that they can solve all their digestive problems. So they devoted a massive advertising budget to that. In fact, Drug Topics magazine, which is a pharmaceutical industry magazine,
Trade magazine,
right, revealed that the 4 companies got together and put up $300 million for advertising for those 4 drugs in the year 1996. One of them, Pepsid AC, was one of the sponsors of the Super Bowl, this past Super Bowl. Now, Super Bowl, when you're in that category, you're in the you're in the big bucks.
Oh yeah.
That costs $1.2 million for a 30-second spot, and they had several of them. I watched the Super Bowl, so
and everybody's eating pepperoni pizzas.
Exactly,
So
and of course that was their
they
pitch.
need an antacid.
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
And in fact, I know some people who got samples in the mail from Pepsid, and what they said was that we know you're going to watch the Super Bowl, and you're going to, you're going to be eating pizza and drinking beer, and it's going to upset your stomach. So take this before the Super Bowl.
Oh.
Yeah. Now.
God, what a world we live in, Stan.
No kidding.
What a
No
world.
kidding.
The drugging of America. That's what we
Well,
have all witnessed.
Here's what infuriates me, frankly.
God bless you with this mission, by the way. I'm all behind it. Really.
It is, to me, the most despicable abuse of ethics to, just because they're able to sell billions of dollars worth of those drugs.
At our expense.
At the expense of our immune systems.
Yeah.
One of our best immune defenses, in the face of what could be the worst threat that mankind has ever had of infectious disease. In other words, if there was ever a time when we as a society need our immune systems to be at their maximum.
Optimal, right.
We have these drugs being not just available, but being pandered to us in a very slick way that destroy our very first line of defense against any kind of infection. Now, of course, our second line of defense, by the way, just continuing this whole paradigm.
Yeah.
Our second line of defense, interestingly enough, if you study a little physiology, is in the intestinal tract also, which is
further down.
Beginning further down, at beginning of the stomach going on down, we have a population of what are called friendly bacteria, about 400 different strains of bacteria which are supposed to compete with the infective bacteria and keep them from implanting, sort of like taking up the living space and then the food supply and making it not available to the infective organism. And so even if we do swallow an infective organism and our stomach acid is not stopping it, then this second line of defense will just sort of wave it on through. It just has to keep on going through.
Sort of
life.
like squatters' rights.
Exactly. That's right.
I got here first.
This territory is occupied. There's no space and no food. You guys got to keep going.
Move
and,
right along.
and that's that throughout our history, or throughout the history of health, which goes back more than we can trace.
Yeah.
That has been an extremely important line of defense. Now the bad news is, we talked about the abuse of antibiotics. Now, unfortunately, antibiotics don't know the difference between a good bacteria and a bad bacteria, and they kill the good bacteria very efficiently. And so a lot of our good bacteria have been destroyed as a result of that. And there are a lot of people who are suffering from some of the, here's the real irony, that people suffer from the effects of destroying their good bacteria, and it exhibits symptoms of indigestion. And so what do? They're trained by their television set to go and get an antacid for that.
Which further exasperates the
That's
situation,
right.
so you've got this loop happening.
And of course,
And a deteriorating
You know,
immune system.
putting the
Altogether.
pharmaceutical industry in the worst possible light, you might even say that they are fostering the perpetual illness of our digestive system for their own interest. Whether that's true or not, I know that's a harsh accusation, but I know that those are bright people.
I think it's more a careful observation,
Well.
is what it is. An astute one. Yes, they're very smart people.
Yeah, I mean,
They know what they're doing, and they have a
understand
bevy of
biochemistry.
chemists and.
Certainly, and they read the same papers that I do. Those are in peer-reviewed medical journals, and they're available. I'm sure that they're read, widely read.
And the people who run the companies are not chemists, they're not doctors, they're MBAs.
And
So
they
they
know
have-
marketing. That's what they
Right. They have a financial idea at stake, not a healing therapeutic one. It's just, they would probably go into any industry that generates certain kinds of revenues. It just happens that they figured out a way to do it pharmaceutically.
I guess that's a good way to put it.
It's just occurring to me, but I think it makes sense. Yeah.
Well,
So what you're talking about is the two main scourges I hear you saying, Stan, if I were to just kind of encapsulate a little bit, no pun intended, is to say that the entire emphasis that we see in this society and on television advertising and the like, and Super Bowl advertising, and direct mail campaigns, where they actually send you the drugs for free, is the antacid industry. And that coupled with the antibiotic industry, are almost putting a squeeze play, another football image, on the entire digestive system, such that our primary, or major, I should say, lines of immune defense are completely compromised in the face of increased environmental toxicity, air, water, soil, food yielding less and less nutrition. We are on the brink of a very serious kind of situation.
it is. In
And
fact,
that's where you're leading, is it
that's
not?
exactly right. And
I'm just interpreting the data.
that's a very good interpretation, and you've put it into a very good capsule, as you say. Pardon the pun, but and I am advocating supplementation related to that.
Please give us some solutions.
Yeah, I give a talk from time to time on this, and I call my talk "Self-Defense in the Coming Plague." And that in in the
Well put.
late stages of that talk, I outline an action plan that I'm recommending. You know, the whole reason that people take antacids and that they take what are called digestive aids, which is a total misnomer. They don't aid digestion at all. The reason that you have those digestive problems is because of inefficiency of your digestive system. Your digestive system partly digests your food but doesn't complete the job.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can solve that problem and get rid of the symptoms and even the cause by completing the digestive process.
Mm-hmm.
You can complete the digestive process and you will get all of the benefit out of the food that you're trying to digest, and you'll also get rid of the symptoms. Now, that's really where takes it back to where I started. I've been an advocate ever since my days with working with Dr. Howell's company
Yes.
of enzyme nutrition. And for most people, that boils down to enzyme supplementation. And so I do advocate that. I advocate taking an enzyme supplement with every meal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and all you're doing is replacing. You're not doing anything artificial to the body. What you're doing is replacing the enzymes that are lost as a result of cooking and processing your food.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're restoring that. You're restoring the
Now,
raw character in a way to...
Right. However, just so I'm clear about it, if a person is eating primarily a raw food diet, they're getting the enzymes right with the food.
Absolutely true. You know what? They don't go and get antacids either.
Right.
You won't find too many people who are eating a raw food diet being customers of Zantac or Tagamet
Exactly.
or Pepsid AC.
So to the extent that a person is eating a cooked food diet, when food's cooked over 118 degrees, then when the enzymes are destroyed, that needs to be supplemented.
Exactly. And
Is there any atrophying of one's own system as a result of taking the supplementation?
You know, I have that question asked to me very often in my lectures, and it really doesn't happen. And the reason it isn't is because you're not giving the body the same kind of enzymes as your body produces. There are different kinds of enzymes. Your body produces enzymes primarily in the pancreas,
Mm-hmm.
and those are intended to work in the small intestine.
Right.
The enzymes that are in your food and are also in the kind of supplement that I advocate, the enzyme supplement that I advocate, actually go to work in the stomach. And they work just the same way as the enzymes that should be in the food in the first place.
Yeah, right.
And so...
It's sort of like you're adding the enzymes in food that it should be there in the first place.
What you really
Or
is...
was there.
Exactly.
But because of the process of cooking, they're no longer there.
You're putting back into the picture a function that should be there.
Yes.
You're not taking, you're not putting any kind of a crutch into the body.
Sure.
And you're not creating a dependence in the sense that you're replacing its own function. What you're doing is restoring a natural function, a natural healthy function.
Beautiful.
That should be there.
I'd like to ask a question since I have the rare opportunity to have you here.
Okay.
Is it true that if you take digestive enzymes like Infinity makes and others, that when you haven't eaten food, so it's not accompanying food,
Mhm.
but you just take them, that those enzymes will have other level functions in the body for other enzymatic activity?
Yes, they
Even
do.
including neurological brain function?
Conceivably. The basic function of enzymes is to break complex molecules down into simpler ones, and that function goes on in the body, all over the body.
Constantly. Right?
Constantly, yeah.
Having
It's-
nothing to do with digestion as such.
Exactly. Or you might say there's digestion going on
Yeah,
everywhere,
that's
not
right.
just in the digestive tract.
Sure.
Um,
Cellularly.
exactly.
The breathing
There is.
and the exchange of cells.
Sometimes we divide enzymes into metabolic enzymes and digestive enzymes, and that really is a false division because an enzyme, if it's in the presence of something that it can work on, it doesn't care whether it's in the digestive tract or not.
Sure.
And there are a lot of occasions when body function does depend on that same, it's called hydrolytic function. even in tissues, in cells, and in many other places other than in the digestive system. And so there actually is a significant amount of research available and that has been done, especially in Europe, about using exogenous, enzyme supplementation and taking it on an empty stomach deliberately so that it is absorbed and goes into systemic circulation and is active on the tissues. And so, yes, that's a valid.
Okay, good.
That's a valid concept.
Thank you for that. I want you, if you would, to just give the message across to the listening and viewing audience that you want us to really know for our own benefit from the research, the many years of research.
I think the best way for me to do that is actually to give you my 5-point action plan. And that is, number one, rather than using antacids, all right, let me put it another way. Point number one should be, don't take antacids. The research that I have done into this area shows that there is no legitimate function, frankly, in human physiology at all for antacids. And when I say that, I'm talking about ordinary Tums and Mylanta and those kind of antacids, and especially I'm talking about these sophisticated acid blocker drugs, I should say, Tagamet, Zantac, Pepcid, and Axid, that are being so highly promoted and advertised and are potentially so destructive to the first line of defense that we have against bacteria. So I'm saying, just like Nancy Reagan said, just say no. Just don't take those. And step two is, rather than do that, complete your digestive process by taking an enzyme supplement so that you, in a natural way, complete the process of getting that food digested and without creating distress. Point number three is use antibiotics very sparingly and very wisely. Make sure that you're not taking an antibiotic. Talk to the doctor if he prescribes an antibiotic. Make sure that you have an infection and that it's the right antibiotic and that you don't have an infection that's antibiotic resistant. And then I have one point that goes with that. I believe in taking probiotic supplements, at least on a daily basis. I very strongly advocate that strongly reinforces the immune system. And so that should be done at least daily. 5th point in my action plan is spread this message to somebody else. Please tell someone else. The immune system of the human race, as we talked about when we first got into this discussion, it really is interdependent with every form of life on the planet. And it's in all of our best interest, I mean even our selfish best interest, to see to it that there is the best immunity measures that can be done in a natural way are employed throughout the world, not just in our society but throughout the world. This is a world mission, and it has to do with maybe one of the worst threats that mankind has ever faced. And so if immunity is the name of the game, then we need to be spreading this message. So please help me with this. Join my team and spread this message.
Beautiful. Well, Stan, I'm on your team.
Okay.
So, thank you so much for being with us.
All right.
Really, very much
Pleasure.
appreciate it.
Okay.
So please, if you want more information on this, give me a call, 212-420-0800, and I'll get you some information about what Stan is talking about. Thanks for joining us so much. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and we look forward to seeing